All right. So first of all, I really want to thank the organizers. I know how challenging it is to organize one of these and hackathons. And one of the reasons I was excited to come here is I've been tasked with the same duty, so I can feel the pressures. And I really want to say you guys did a brilliant job, and it's given me a lot of ideas. The other thing, I want to start with a confession. I'm an accidental computer programmer. I only actually started to share free software when I was a postdoc. And the history was that I've spent my whole career using brain imaging to understand the consequences of brain injury from stroke. And when I started my postdoc, we were using a tool called Mayo Clinic's Analyze to draw lesions, and I would help the radiologist to do that. The problem is that software costs $6,000 per license per year and wouldn't run on a normal computer. You had to use a Sun workstation. And so I had to call everyone else at the hospital, at the Medical Research Council, at the university, and say, today I'm working with radiology to draw lesions. And then the radiologist I was working with got prostate cancer and died very quickly. And he had a friend who knew him very well and said, I will help you draw lesions and go through all the patients. But he was very close to retirement, and this was in 1997. And he was almost computer illiterate. And trying to use a Sun workstation that had these weird mice and this incredibly complicated Analyze software was unbelievably complicated to him. And being of that older generation, he didn't call something a personal computer. He called the computer on his desk his micro. And so he said, I just want something to look at MRIs on my micro. So I decided to create my first software that was called Micro to allow him to look at MRIs as micro. And back then, T1 scans were 16 megabytes, and his personal computer had 20 megabytes of memory, and it had to store the lesion. So it was a bit of a trick. But ever since then, I've created tools, and they tended to be tools that I've been sort of the sole creator on. And the tool I want to talk about today is actually the first one where I'm embracing the culture that you guys take for granted and grown up with, of this idea of using things communally and working communally to develop new tools. And so I want to talk about this idea of using let me get the clicker to really be on the right. Yeah, all right. Okay. So I want to talk about our new tool that's really designed to look at visualization of brain imaging. And if you think about it, it doesn't matter where you are in the stack of brain imaging. I think the key is in the term neuroimaging, that images are key to it. That regardless of whether it's acquisition, processing, or inference and dissemination, you need a way to understand your data and visualize what's happening and understand the subtle ways that the tools that we have can get disrupted. And so I like to think of the example of it's like modern self-driving cars, that they're remarkably reliable, but they do require human intervention to stop catastrophic failures. And as motivation, I do want to say we can't use off-the-shelf tools in our field. We can't use Blender or Illustrator or Photoshop, because we really deal with our own special sets of formats and our own special sets of representations for data. So we really do need to think of what are the tools that we need as a domain to deal with our problems. And the good news is we have a lot of tools. And in one sense, the bad news is we have a lot of tools. And so it doesn't matter if you use AFNI or FSL or FreeSurfer, they all come with their built-in visualization tools. And they all have their own kind of formats that they like. FreeSurfer likes MGH, AFNI likes Brick. And they all have their own styles of doing things. And so as a user, it's very easy to get locked in. It's hard to transfer your skills to a different system, because the images may not work, the motor gestures you've learned may not work. And that's challenging. And also each of these teams has to put in their own effort to update things. And I was mentioning this to you earlier, but I think it's interesting. You can take Bob Cox's AFNI code that he wrote in 1994 on silicon graphics computers that don't exist today. And you can take his compute code and it'll automatically just run on an ARM architecture computer like mine that didn't exist when he wrote it, and it will just work. but the graphics languages we use have changed radically. And so when we develop graphics tools, we're on this process of having to continuously put time into maintaining and keeping up with the latest tricks video gamers have to doing things. And so there is a kind of a wasted effort of our whole field doing different things. And beyond that continuous evolutionary pressure, there's now revolutionary pressure that we now have cloud compute. We want to deal with huge data sets that are going to use cloud resources. And we have these capabilities of all these devices that tablets might be particularly good for drawing lesions on. If you find something unusual, you might want to send it to someone who might be about to catch a flight and you like to have them look at it on a phone. So web technologies are a great opportunity, but they're also kind of a challenge. And so my sense is this is kind of a step time where we can say, we as a community can work together and say, what are common visualization tools? How do we solve all of our problems in our formats? And so we've tried to create a tool that's already been adopted by quite a few of the different popular tools in our field that tries to solve this problem using web technologies to provide a very simple modular problem. And it actually, I would say it solves two problems. I mentioned the vendor lock-in, but it's also worth saying, since each one of our tools tries to do everything, the user interfaces tend to be really complicated and convoluted. And that makes it particularly hard to use different tools. If you think about a very modular visualization tool, you can put it into a solution that has as many or as few widgets or user interface elements to achieve the task you want at hand. And so that's sort of our vision, is to have this plug-in modular device. And I want to show you one example. And this is Satya Ghosh created these AI models called No Brainer. And Sergey Please and his team were able to take them to MeshNet to create these very efficient AI models to do brain segmentation and brain parcellation and brain extraction. And one of the interesting things is we all realize how AI models can revolutionize things. But we as scientists have a challenge that when we have a model that works, we want other people to use it. But there tends to be this really complicated chain. What type of hardware do we need to process it? What is all the software stack to do that? Do they need a specific NVIDIA graphics card and CUDA libraries and all these other aspects? But in truth, AI models are incredibly compute intensive to develop, but the actual inference can be done very efficiently on any graphics card using web technologies. And so there's modern tools like Onyx, TensorFlow.js, and TinyGrad that are able to use the end user's computer. So I want to show you one example of how we can do this to solve an everyday problem. So here's a web page. Here's Brain to Print. You can go to this web page yourself. Let's take a scan that we haven't seen before. So I won't use just the one that comes with it. Let's take an image that's out of the training set. My copy and paste doesn't work. I'll just use the image that's here. So this happens to be my brain. You might be able to recognize my plastic nose, right? But we can then choose some of the AI models to run, and we'll just choose to do a simple model. This is my own personal computer that's running this. It has no fan in it. It's the least expensive computer you can get, but the AI model is running on my computer. And the other thing that's nice as an AI developer is this is great for scale. If you have a model that's really popular and you're letting people use your supercomputer to use it, what if you have 1,000 new users, right? The nice thing with using the end user's graphics card to do all the hard work is if you get 1,000 users, you've got 1,000 graphics cards that can do the job, right? So it scales beautifully as you come up with new users. And so you can see it's parcellated the brain, found all the brains. You can say, oh, this looks nice. Well, why don't I create a mesh? And you can have a few different choices of how you do this, but then you can create a mesh. And this runs on any computer. I don't have to install any software. And then I can save the mesh and print it as a 3D printing, right? So a nice example of an applet that shows you visualization that's interactive. You can deal with all of the different formats we do with it, and we can plug it in and look at different tools. So what I want to try to show for the next few slides is how we can use different applications. So BrainLife at UT Austin is a cloud service to run huge scale neuroimaging data, but it also provides ways that you can import lots of data to BIDS. And we talked about this a lot in these talks, but one of the challenges is that usually curating data is tricky. You want to get all the data there. A lot of people use my own BCM Next to upload the data, but you also have to make sure you remove the face from the data, identified all the properties correctly, has it validated. So BrainLife has their easy bids that allows you to check that you've properly removed the face. AFNI now has a QC where we'll try to show you different plots and allow you to annotate when it's failed or succeeded in doing different processing stages. And initially, each image is just a static two-dimensional image, but then you can click on it and interactively look at it. So if you want to look through different volumes and say, where did the problems happen? What are the artifacts looking like? What does it look like in an active rendering? You can go through and see that. FreeSurfer's new Free Browse also uses NiiVue as its module. So it now emulates the classic interface that FreeSurfer users are used to, but it now has this ability to be provided on the web. FSL is using NiiVue for its documentation to provide interactive documentation to see the tools. The NRG group has a way that you can look at different HCP streamline data from the Human Connectome project to see the connectivity in brains using your web browser. Obviously, OpenNeuro has it as a way that you can view the data sets that are available on OpenNeuro, so you can see what is the quality, what do the data look like. You can see a little timeline, so you can actively select which particular volume you want to look at times. I also want to showcase this is our own aphasia recovery cohort. So one thing we try to do, my center works with stroke patients, and most clinical data sets are very private, and it's hard for other people to really test their models on and develop it. And I think that's understandable. I think that's how it will be for a long time. It's hard to share clinical data. But we try to create two clinical data sets. Aphasia recovery cohort is from 230 chronic patients that have been seen. Each individual has been seen multiple times post-injury, so you can see changes in the brain. We also have the acute soup data set that already has over 1,700 acute patients. And so this allows us to train our models on clinical data sets and see brain injury and understand our tools to map these and analyze these data sets. And so they can act as a shared tool. Also, those of you who are using iPad, iPhones, or Mac devices, you can go to the App Store and you can already download NiiVue as a tool to use locally. So I'm showing you how BrainShop can use AI models to identify parts of the brain. And we've also got those models to identify injuries in the brain. The other thing we can do is we can use this edge-based prediction to allow clinicians to predict recovery in patients. And so this is an example of visual neglect. So this is work I've done with a group in Tübingen, Germany, where classically patients with this after right hemisphere brain injury tend to ignore stimuli on the left side of the display. So this bottom panel is showing you Cs and mirror image Cs, and patients are asked to circle all of the items that aren't perfect circles. And the classic pattern with right hemisphere patients is they tend to notice most of the items on the right side of the page and ignore those on the left. This has profound implications. Some patients recover, some don't. And what we have is a tool that by knowing the patient's acute behavior and knowing their pattern of injury, we can have a very accurate prediction of which patients will recover and which really are going to need consistent care. And again, this is an edge-based tool, so the clinician doesn't have to share the data. That's another advantage of these edge-based AI tools is you don't have to share your private data off your computer. All the compute happens on your computer, right? So it's a very nice way to provide these things. Slice drop is another classic example. This was actually in 2013, one of the first WebGL visualization tools was Daniel Haynes' Slice drop. And they've now embedded our new WebGL2 for their Slice drop reloaded that provides this really classically famous interface where you can drop images, play with different features, and really understand what's going on. The one thing, and this is kind of coming to the end of this talk of different ways that NiiVue's already been used. And I'm trying to showcase ways you can think of using it. We also realized Jupyter notebooks are really useful. And any visualization in a Jupyter notebook ultimately has to be web technologies, right? So it can't, tools that want to use OpenGL or other desktop technologies have to have separate windows. They can't use, be directly embedded in Jupyter Notebook. So we tried to say we can put NiiVue directly into Python. And there's a couple of different ways of doing this. So the NiiLearn team uses NiiVue as its own little module with its own scripts around it. But the idea of NiiVue is to try to make it very Pythonic. So even though web technologies have to be written in JavaScript, from the user's experience, much like using Matplotlib or other visualization tools in Jupyter Notebook, it feels very much like a Python tool. And so this is a work in progress, but if you guys are interested in this, watch this space or even contribute. You can, we have regular meetings, you can join us. And that's what I kind of want to spend the next part of the time is saying, how can you use this? How I've shown you ways other people use this. One of the ideas of a brain hack is to give you guys ideas of how can you use this. And one of the things I want to say about it is we try to develop this very plug-in architecture, and we realize that our field has been around for quite a few years and has very proven known tools. And what we've done is simply taken those tools and brought them to the web. And that means they work anywhere. The user doesn't have to download anything. So if you want to use ants for normalization, or FSL's BET for brain extraction, or my DCM to NICS, or any function out of the popular FSL's maths, FSL's flirt, or even a lot of people who are engineering know that ITK has an incredible plethora of different tools. We now also support the ITK WebAssembly packages. And so you can add these as needed to do specific tasks. So if you want to use BET in a tool, the brain extraction tool on a web page, it's very simple to add in as a simple plugin module. It's just one extra load from NPM, and you've got BET as a tool to use. We've got examples of how to do it. As I already mentioned, we already have examples to show you how you can run AI models on the edge using TensorFlow, Tinigrad, and Onyx. And the nice thing from your perspective is NiiVue already reads all the image formats, right? So if someone happens to be using FreeSurfer and they have an MGH format file, or someone's using FSL and has a Nifty file, or someone's using AFNI as a brick file, this one viewer deals with all the reading and handling of that and the visualization of the images, and your AI model can simply deal with the image data that you get from that tool. So that's one of the nice aspects of creating this nice wrapper. There's some other things we can do that I think are really important with web pages that are kind of surprising. And it's something that you could say our first aim was, let's try to replicate what AFNI and FSL and FreeSurfer, the three teams we're actively working with. We wanted to make sure we could check the boxes of everything they wanted to do. But then we thought, what can we do that's unique by having a web page? And one of the ideas we had is we can actually create a document of an entire scene that has everything in it. And it is a web page. And the interesting thing about web pages is they live in what's called a sandbox. They aren't allowed to see other files on your computer unless you drag them to it. They live in this very self-contained world, so they're considered very safe. They're not like a standard executable. Someone emails you HTML, you can view it, right? So NiiVue can save itself with all the entire scene. So if you want to adjust the contrast on an image, you see some anomaly in an MRI scan and you want a radiologist to give you feedback, you can put the crosshair, you can put annotations. I actually use this in my class where the students learn anatomy in their homework assignment. They have to place all the different anatomical locations correctly, and then they can just send me a web page and I can check the results, right? So it's very nice that you have this way of being able to have a feedback. If some user has an AI model and it doesn't work, they could send you back the data and say, hey, here's an example, here's an edge case where your model isn't doing the correct thing, right? So this ability to document, not just instead of sending a nifty file, but saying, this is the mesh, the streamlines, the voxels, the connectomes, and all the contrast and other settings of what I'm looking at. You can preserve that and transmit that to other people very easily. There's other little things we thought of And one thing, people talk a lot about the reproducibility of neuroimaging not being very good. And one of the challenges is because we tend to have to correct for so many thousands of comparisons, we tend to be very stringent on our statistical thresholds. And it ends up we just see the peaks from icebergs, and we don't see the trends underneath. And so one of the things we provided is the ability to outline and say, these areas that are outlined are the areas that survive the strict statistical thresholding, but you can also see the trends and see how similar the patterns are between other studies, that even though different peaks might be surviving in different studies, maybe the overall trends are the same. The other thing we do is we allow you to provide asymmetric statistical thresholds. You can include as many statistical maps, and you can choose whatever statistical thresholds you want. So generally speaking, with most neuroimaging studies, if you're using statistical thresholds that are symmetrical, the same statistical threshold for positive and negative effects, you're actually having to be too conservative on one tail. You're not actually giving an accurate nominal control. So we allow you to choose the statistical thresholds that are appropriate for your data. The other thing I think that's really neat, and I think most of you have grown up in the Python era. And so to you, this is going to seem like pretty obvious. But to me, one of the really neat things about developing in JavaScript a web language is that it is fundamentally scriptable. So it allows us to create this incredible documentation that actually gives you live demos of how to do everything. And particularly the live demos for JavaScript get to be web pages. So we can have something where you can read, oh, I want to know how to set a color map. And you get all the parameters that tell you how to do it. But then it actually says, see a demo usage, where you can go to a live demo web page. You can try it out. You can click on all the different color maps you want. And you can even insert your own script values to create your own color maps to have any custom color you want. So it really allows you to play, as developers, to play with the tool itself and see how it works. And it's a very living kind of a form of documentation that we tried to create with this. So let's skip one. Okay, so these are the final points that I wanted to say here. The first thing is we want people to kind of engage and use this. And so my model for how we try to distribute this is a cookbook, a recipe book, where you can browse through. We put in lots of different features here, but just like a cookbook, and you can flip through the pages and you can see a recipe and say, oh, I want to try that. Or at least I want to riff off of that. I like this as a starting point, and I'll change from it, right? So you can go to our web page, and it has lists of all the different demos we've created for it. And with each one of those demos, you can open up the web page, interact with it, see it, but then you can also read the raw web page itself, and you can see this minimalist demo that's actually directly linked to all of our documentation that tries to exhibit different features and how you set up different things. The other thing is, it's interesting, and I mentioned this earlier to some of the members, every copy of FreeSurf and FSL includes my code in it. But ironically, I cannot view FreeSurf and FSL code because while they're free, they aren't actually open source, right? They're institutional licenses. And so if I were to look at it, it would be the forbidden fruit. I couldn't make my own code, right? So when I worked with FreeSurf and FSL, I mean, the AFNI groups is already open source, but I said, everything we do is BSD. And my analogy for this is O negative bud. We are the universal donor. If you have an institutional license, you can use it. It was interesting. So I created a speed up for FSL that made it much faster, but it turned out the compression technique, it turns out there was a single tiny component that was actually GPL code. And when I made the commit to make FSL faster, they were like, we cannot include this code because that would break our institutional license. You're inserting a virus of GPL into us. And it turns out I ended up finding out that the Google Chrome people had found exactly the same problem, and they had their own open license code. But the problem is, so licensing is, I think there's a lot of reasons people use licensing. I'm not trying to be disrespectful of different groups that have come up with different licenses, but I do want to say our ethos is being something that you can use in a commercial product, or you can use in an institutional project or a GPL project. That's up to you. We're the universal donor, right? So You can contribute to us, you can read from us, you can see everything we do. It's all open, right? So how can you get involved? Well, one thing is, if you think there's new things we can do, communicate with us. So we have all sorts of ways that you can go to GitHub, you can post a new issue and say, here's some feature I'd really like to have. And then we will respond to you in some way. Sometimes we'll even help you with it. You can also collaborate by embedding it in your own project. So we have lots of simple demos that show you how you can use our format, and you can pick and choose the right parts to build the solution you need for your little problem. You can also develop. So just with a few lines of code, we have this way that you can open up a hot reloadable web page. So you put in these lines of code, a web page flashes up, and as you edit any line of the source code, every time you save the file, the web page reloads with your latest version of the code. So it's a nice way to kind of really understand how things work and work with the program very interactively. So if you want, you can collaborate. And if you want, you can contribute to us and create a new pull request and join the community and give back to the community. We're on a 3-year mission supported by the Brain Initiative. Bad news, Brain Initiative last year got a 40% cut. So this may be the end of a 3-year mission, but we're 1 year through. And so our first year, our goal was, we called it any browser. So we really wanted to show edge platforms. We really wanted to engage a lot of the low-level developers who had a lot of experience of these are the core tools that their users needed and what was the API they wanted. And then now we've entered our year 2, which we see as any operating system. So that's our desktop apps, our Jupyter implementation, are really trying to engage with the user community to see what it's like. And then our final year, really working much closer with Franco Pastelli and the BrainLife group, is the Anywhere, which is federated analyses, big data sharing, and really creating the entire ecosystem where you can use these web technologies. So that's kind of the vision of NiiVue. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
That's pretty incredible. I'm like wondering what the catch is. So if you know, when I use FSL, there's a lot of cool built-in analysis tools. Is it limited by going to a web-based browser? Like
so one thing is, so let me put it to you this way. FSL has a problem that all of their compute tools, right? So Flirt, Slice Timer, their statistical analysis tool, Flame, all of these tools work on the command line. That's how they're designed. But their visualization of it, you being able to check it, requires you to have a web front end. And so this is the front end that allows it to work. In the same way, AFNI has this whole chain of pipeline tools that work good on the command line, but their visualization tool is not web capable, right? So what we're trying to say is we're a web capable tool. The other thing I want to say is, in terms of what is the catch, I would say we have a very clear idea of what our lane is, right? So we already heard about these super high resolution things in Neuroglancer. And again, this goes back to my idea, there's going to be jet airplanes and there'll be oil tankers, right? There's different niches. And we think we can fill our domain in this niche of edge, cloud tools for MRI imaging, connectome streamlines, et cetera. I think we've got that covered, but we certainly don't feel like there's other lanes where we feel like we want a very lean API, we want something that's very tight. And there's other areas that simply aren't in our remit, right? So we collaborate with a lot of other teams who are working with Neuroglancer and give them feedback. Everything is open source. They can use our stuff. We can use their stuff, right? But we're very laser focused on something that looks snappy. You can load it on any device. It'll just run.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for this really neat talk. I have 2 questions. My first one is, so let's just say you're in the lab that deals with kids and everybody's very protective of, you know, but like everybody like lost their minds over a desk. Is the selling point here And it, like, the fact that I can use this with kid data is that everything's done locally, and then.
I would say you can use this however you want. So if you want to use it as a desktop app, you can go to the Apple Mac Store, the app stores, you can get it as a desktop app and it won't be part of a kit. If you want a zero footprint tool that you just download and drop things on, you can do that. We have desktop apps, but also if you use BrainLife and other things, we also will have it on the cloud stack, right? So one of the things that's interesting about this is, I mean, I historically come from writing desktop applications, and then you have this challenge. Well, Windows uses DirectX, Linux uses Vulkan, Mac uses Metal, but it's interesting that the language we use is the intersection of those three tools. They're saying these are things that will run very high performance. As long as you stay within these things, they won't use a lot of batteries. And so through what Google calls Angle, the almost native graphics layer, we use whatever happens to be the best driver for each device, right? So it works anywhere. So it does make a good desktop app if you don't want to do it, don't want to share it. I was showing you the edge-based stuff that can do AI on the edge without having anything leave the local computer, but it's just as well as a tool that you can run in the cloud to use your cloud service as if you want your data to live there. That was the first question?
Yeah. I was back to the slide where you're talking about that really wide. It was like number 7, I think. Sorry, like a little bit further back. I was just in the garage. Sorry, 6. Thank you.
So you can try it out. So Tractoscope. So Ariel Rucombe and his group created a nice interface to allow people to connect to the HCP data. And again, you know, I'd like to think next year when I come here, or when I see it some future BrainHack, maybe it'll be one of your tools, right? We're happy to, if you've got an idea for a itch you want to scratch, this is our little module that allows you to do that. Yeah.
Thanks, this was great. So I'm sort of curious, let's say I want to use this tool and I have some images. What's your sort of workflow? Do you have like, you're running the local server and you're editing those web pages, or are you on the cookbook examples and you see like, okay, here's the overlay, like how do you replace those files? Is that something that you have to do in the JavaScript, or?
So you can choose how you want to do that, right? So obviously with the Python, you could do it through NiiVue, so you can give it your data directly through Python. You can have a backend that will serve everything if you want things to run on the cloud, or if you want it to be an edge where where all the data stays on the user's computer, then you just have the user drag and drop the images and it will handle them. So it's your choice of what problem do you need to solve, and then it will fit there. So its job is simply to be the visualization. You can choose whatever kind of wrapper you want to give it to the user, you know, in a way to solve the problem they have.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question about the Jupyter Notebook package.
Right.
So how far along is that? What does it do with them?
It does quite a bit. So we built it with any widget. It's coming along. So the NiiLearn team is very keen on this because right now they have 3 different independent rendering engines that they aren't really happy with either. And so they have some Chan Zuckerberg funds to support this. And then Christian O'Reilly and our team is working to meet them. And so I think it's happening very rapidly now. We had to get to the right state of having everything else stable. And it's now coming together very quickly. So I would say try it out. See what you think. But if you don't like it, try it out next month, because we're actually, so the group, the AFNI and FSL, the main developers, we meet every fortnight. We work on 2-week code sprints. And so actually this coming up Wednesday is in 3 weeks, we're going to be actually meeting for the IPy NiiVue codes, update. And I think they're kind of sprinting to do their next presentation. So we'll see. I think it will come together.
What we can use for visualizing the data. So
We'd love to be involved. I mean, that's something that we do. I mean, I think Jupyter really empowers people to get a handle on their data. I have to say, I don't come from a Python background, so it really requires people who they want things to feel right? And so I think that, can you do a lot with it now? Yes. Does it feel janky if you're a Python user? Yes, right? So I think that those are the rough edges we're smoothing out now. The functionality is there, but it's making it so that the deliverable looks like a professional thing that end users feel like, okay, I really like this. That's the polishing stage that we're at now. All right. Thanks very much.